So my name is Maggie Dahlstrom. I'm a queer comics historian from Columbus, Ohio. I am super honored to be with these great comics legends, and I'm going to allow themselves to introduce themselves and the work that they've done. Would you like to kick it off, Lee?
I'm Lee Mars. I started, I was one of the founding mommies of women's comics back in 1972. And I've done zillions of comics. I'm best known for The Further Adventures of Pudge Girl Blimp, available at table 54. So, next.
Hello, I am Dylan Edwards, and I am a trans cartoonist, and I have been doing comics for about 25 years. And I put this together for this show once I found out I was going to be on this panel. This is a zine collection of my very earliest trans comics from 25 years ago. Which I did annotations of because trans culture has changed so much in the last 25 years that some of these comics do not make sense to contemporary trans people unless you're old like me. So this is, and I am at table 10, which is directly outside the door to this theater, so I'm very easy to find. I also brought The Outfield, which was my book of queer sports comics that I did for Outsports.com back in the 2000s. And I wanted to make sure I had this book here because Heated Rivalry is really popular. And so if you want more comics about sports being very gay, I have this book. I do not have this book here. I had to borrow this from Maggie, but this is my book Transposes, which I have sold out of the print version of, but this was a book of true stories about queer trans masculine people, which I did because at the time that I did this book, there were no books about queer trans masculine people, either in prose or in comics. So that's what this is all about.
Hi, my name is Robin Adams. Next person calls me a legend. I don't know. I think my eyes are going to fall out of my head. So I created a comic book called Home is on 5, and this was a self-published during the queer zine explosion in the early 1992. It's a 3-issue superhero apocalyptic dystopian adventure comic with 5 trans femme drag queens who are imbued by the goddess with superpowers to fight the Christian theocracy that had turned San Francisco into a outdoor prison. So kind of fun, a little heavy, but very X-Men. I was 22 years old at the time, and I did that. And I recently have not done comics for a very long time. I was privileged to do a story for Alphabet, which is an amazing book, as well as Theater of Terror, thanks to our friend Justin Hall. Yeah. So, yes, it's been a while, but here I am.
Well, that's actually a great bridge into the first thing that I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned that you were working in the queer zine explosion of the 90s. And so, as I mentioned earlier, each of you existed in a very different period of queer comics, from the zine explosion to early webcomics to the birth of gay comics. So I was wondering if each of you could start talking about what the environment was that you were working in when you were publishing these works. So if you want to start, Robin.
Well, perhaps.
Oh, Lee, do you want to start?
Want to go through chronological order? Let us know what it was like.
Well, back in the day, I just drew stories and created stories of what was going on around me. And I lived in the Beast Bay, so it seemed that the lesbian environment was really incestuous. And I did a story about it called Networking, which is on sale up at table 54. Everybody was rooming with everybody else or had roomed with somebody who was somebody else's sister, who had belonged to a swimming club where the person was also had been lovers with 2 other women, et cetera, et cetera. And so everybody, knew in the biblical sense, everybody. And so that's what I drew. In Pudge Girl Blimp, the Pudge can't decide whether she's bisexual, gay, hetero, no telling. And there isn't any conclusion at the end of the book. But when Gay Comics came along, Howard Cruz's Gay Comics, it gave me an opportunity to even go into even more gay stories. And again, these were just things that I either experienced personally or I heard from gossip from somebody else or somebody else or somebody else. And although gays were alive and well here in San Francisco, the West Bay people were kind of more domestic, not quite as adventuresome.
I actually, real quick, did want to talk about Gay Comics because in the very first issue, the very first comic in it is yours, Stick in the Mud.
And that, again, was a story from my own life. I'm bisexual, so I'd been through quite a few ups and downs, ins and outs. Never could quite make up my mind about things. So that was you can see it there. Networking is at the far left for y'all, and Stick in the Mud is the one on the far right. Gay Comics was when Dennis Kitchen and Howard Cruz wanted to start Gay Comics, Howard wasn't out yet, and he had straight clients who he felt could damage his relationship to those clients. But Dennis convinced him that it would be a great thing to come out with Gay Comics. So, and in those days, people didn't know who was gay, who was not. So Dennis sent out a letter to just everybody, all the cartoonists he knew, stating, if you are gay, blah, 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 blah. And he didn't get much flack for that. The straight people figured, well, this is just what's happening. The gay people were delighted. So Howard began to edit the first issues. And it continued for quite a while. And then there were collected issues, a couple of collected issues. So it obviously had an audience.
Well, thank you so much for talking about that. Dylan, would you like to take the floor?
So what the environment was like when I started doing these works? Is that what the question?
Yeah, 100%.
So I came out as trans in 2000, and for trans men, we were so invisible that I had not even heard of trans men. I was 24 when I first started to try to explore that. I had never even heard of trans men at all. I reverse engineered that we might be possible based on the concept that, okay, there are trans women, but can you go the other way? So the first indication I got that my theory was correct was when the movie Boys Don't Cry came out. And I went and watched it, and I did not identify with Brandon Teena at all. And that my one image of a trans man was someone that I couldn't connect with. And so I thought, maybe I must not be trans. And unfortunately, the feelings did not go away, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. So when I started doing these comics shortly after I came out, I realized that what I actually needed was not stories about us getting brutally murdered for existing. I wanted funny things that were relatable to other trans people. Like, oh no, issues with binding, don't we all have those? The cover is of some silly little superheroes, trans man and tranny boy. And was just kind of riffing on like the things that we called ourselves. And the comics were not written for a cis audience. I had no interest in explaining transness to cis people. And in fact, I was still stealth when I was working on these. And that was, like, I was stealth for about 10 years after I transitioned, and that was a lot to do with the environment around us, it was just the only way to really be safe at that time. When I started working on transposes, I had a similar thing with what you were just talking about with Howard Cruz, where my editor was like, your readers are really going to want to know your relationship to the material. So this is the thing that I actually came out officially as I was working on it. But part of the reason I was inspired to come out is that I saw younger trans people just being out online and being like, I'm trans. And I'm like, why am I being such a coward? And I think part of that was the cultural change, but I felt like it was important to say, like, yes, I, the person who created this, created it because I needed, again, material that was not about us getting brutally murdered, but about us living. And so this book was very much about living life as a queer trans person. And this was a similar thing. Like I was living in Boston when I created these comics, and I was really into baseball. And I just started doing silly comics about how like homoerotic baseball was, and then I pitched it to Outsports, and Outsports was like, why don't you do a monthly comic for us? So this was all just like the stuff that's already there that we all know and giggle about, but you know, it's like, okay, it is very homoerotic that these guys are piling up on top of each other. So I just wanted them to do things that were fun and connecting with life and living rather than, you know, the tragedy that we often focus on, and the tragedy that is often sold to cis straight people to be like, this is why you should feel sorry for us and support us. And it's like, and that's important to acknowledge that tragedy, but for us who are trying to live, we need things that connect to life. So that was kind of what I was working on when I was thinking about these things. I mean, obviously some of this is zine. I was doing a lot of stuff that was online. That was the cheapest way to publish. And I don't think any comics publisher would have touched any of this. I did pitch a few, and I couldn't get anywhere with any of them. But like Outsports was online. It was an online magazine. So they're like, yeah, sure, do a comic for us. So that was what was available to me as a career track, was doing online works. And it certainly democratized the process because I wasn't having to worry about whether or not a straight cis editor at, you know, Houghton Mifflin or whatever was going to be upset about the fact that I'm making jokes about binding or something like that.
And that's something that I really appreciate in reading your work is you do a really good job capturing the biographical, though not necessarily the autobiographical. And telling stories that are just mundane and happen in the world of you just running into all of these things as a trans man, whether it's the trans bar or the friends and transposes. But it's really cool how in your comics you've sort of developed that community. And I imagine that's a function of online publication.
For sure, because like when I first came out as trans, I went to a support group with other trans guys in Boston, and it was a big support group. It was probably 20 or 30 people, but we were all existing in the shadows. And the way to actually have frank conversations a lot of the time, especially with a really small community, was to be online. So I was part of an online discussion group called Tranny Fags, where queer trans guys from all over the country and all over the world could talk to each other on an email list. And when you're talking about knowing the 20 or 30 trans guys in a large major city, like the online definitely opens up your world a lot more. And that was a way to really connect. I think online was a huge part of getting trans people to find out about themselves and figure out who they were. Because if you're just trying to look at the people directly around you, you may struggle to find that community. But when you open it up to the whole world, it's much easier to find that community and find the people you connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Robin, if you want to go ahead and talk about your experience.
Sure. So I was a newly out queer person in 1991. And the very first time that I went out dressed as a woman, I went to this awesome underground nightclub in San Francisco called Clubstitute, and met these incredible, fierce, queer people, drag queens and trans femmes, who just didn't give a fuck and just lived their lives just out, you know. And I had been a very, super closeted person growing up. I'm from southern New Mexico. And so I entered this community of incredible people. And as is my wont, I was like, well, what can I do creatively to respond to this, to be a part of this? And didn't feel like I could sing or dance. And I was like, so I started drawing. That's what I do. And started drawing these superhero drag queens, because some of these queens were just goddesses, you know. They're just amazing, fierce Amazons. And I just wanted to like celebrate them. And I was an X-Men comics geek in the 80s when the X-Men were really good. And so I created these. It's sort of an X-Men ripoff. It's like little Days of Future Past, if you know what that is. And I was also, I was responding to, I'm trying to figure out like who I am and how this works. You know, somebody told me today that, I like your book. It's a little dated. And it is, because it's like all the characters, they just call each other drag queens. That's all we knew. It's all we knew to call each other. Easily half of them qualify as trans feminine or trans, but we didn't. They were all just drag queens. I was always sort of real girl, not drag queen, but I hung out with drag queens.
Yeah.
I'm not a drag queen. I was raised by drag queens. And then I was also kind of like, this was the early 90s, the AIDS crisis was going on. Queer Nation and ACT UP were doing their thing in San Francisco. This whole level of like militant queer activism was happening, and I was trying to, orient myself to that. I witnessed the AB 101 riot, and was kind of processing all this. And I've always had kind of a paranoid, it's like the CIA was funding drugs and creating HIV, and we had covert wars going on in Central America and all this stuff. So I created this world where like all this stuff, leads up to queer people queer people having to fight back and therefore being scapegoated. Like as soon as we fight back, then they come down really hard on us. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing in places like Minneapolis today or whatever, like as soon as somebody fucking stands up, then they come down really hard, So Home Zone 5 was a world where the right-wing patriarchy had basically rounded us all up, into a ghetto. I remember watching documentaries about the Warsaw Ghetto and what that was like. But then I also wanted to make a fun comic book, I wanted to, I'm one of the that's characters based on me, and she's kind of Kitty Pryde-ish, and I just wanted to have fun with like all these sort of tropes that I liked. And part of it was also, the tagline is, comics aren't just for straight boys anymore. This was like the early 90s when Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and all that kind of like aggro superhero thing was happening. And I was like, where do I fit in with that? Because I kind of like that, but I'm also kind of a big sissy, and I don't know, So it was just an opportunity to play with that. And like we said, the queer zine explosion was happening. So people are just publishing, just go down to Kinko's and publish a book and pass it out. We would drop it off at Different Light Bookstore. I would mail it out to other queer bookstores on this list. There was a guy named Larry Bod Roberts who had a directory of queer zines called Holy Tit Clamps. There was Holy Tit Clamps and there was Queer Zine Explosion or whatever it was. But anyway, so he would review all this stuff, and this, eventually I was getting letters from like people in Chicago or Columbus or wherever, that somehow got a hold of this. I only made 300 copies of this thing, but that was pretty cool. So yeah, that was the environment, and what there was of queer comics I didn't know until I met John Macy. He and I were tabling at Club Uranus nightclub one night. Amidst all the naked go-go dancers, and he and I were talking comics, and so I learned a lot from him. And eventually, I also this comic book got me go back to art school, because I had dropped out of art school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and then I just start drawing this thing, and I'm like, I want to be an illustrator. So I went to illustration school, and eventually, got to take real art classes. So it got me. This led to my career, but I did have to stop it because I had to focus on my schooling, and then life, took off. So it ends on a cliffhanger, and I've kind of been wondering for the last 35 years what happens. But and I do just want to say, if you're interested in reading the book, I've recently, for a limited time, it's online at homozone.com. You can download the whole PDF. I would love to hear if you want to read it and let me know what you think. That would just make my heart do good. I'm not too worried about trying to sell the thing anymore. I just want to get it out there because I do think it's relevant. It's certainly relevant today. And
It is.
I
It's
think
really
if
funny.
anybody, I'm sure it would get me on an FBI list if we, go viral. So let's do it.
That's actually something that I wanted to talk about, because that is one of the poignant things and the relevant things of the time that you feature in your book, is that queer people are identified by scanning their brains. And so there's this very queer awareness of the threat of outing in a time where that's not safe, in the 90s, where this exists in San Francisco and Boston, and that's it. And can you talk about sort of the fear and the awareness of existing in this world in the 90s while you were writing and while you were publishing this across the country?
I don't know. I remember being. I feel like I'm more concerned now than I was then. It was hard to come out and back home or in other places. That's for sure. But there was so much freedom in this. I was in this cool little underground community in San Francisco, and it was just free. Everybody was free. And even so, I had a hard time feeling out. You know what I mean, right? It's like I'm out, but I'm still a little shy about it. But what was going on in the country? The government was not really lifting a hand to stop the plague that was happening, and the whole thing about scanning your hypothalamus to figure out who the queers are. That was something that people talked about. And I don't know. This right-wing Christian thing has been coming for a long time, right? Jerry Falwell and the Moral Majority factor into this book, and they were on my mind very much when I was in high school. So it's just, it's really weird to be here in 2026 and seeing so many of the things that we were worried about then come around. It's like we kind of got a break during the Clinton administration. It's like, oh, maybe this is going to be okay. Oh.
Well, thank you so much. Another thing that I was really curious about is this idea of pioneering and setting out a path into the wilderness that hadn't really existed before. And so all of you talked about not necessarily seeing other people doing this when you were getting started. So I'm kind of curious, when was the moment that you connected with that community, and what comics were you seeing that was oh, that's me, that was motivating you to work with that? Because I know that X-Men is a really big influence on you, but for all of y'all, was there anything that really stuck out as?
Well, I will say this. I had one of the people that I met back then was Miss Bob Davis, who currently runs the Louise Lawrence Transgender Archive. And she's been collecting transgender stuff since 1979. And we had mutual friends, and I had the very rare opportunity at the time, because none of this information was out there, to go see like all this transgender material. You know, books that were published in the 30s and 40s and 60s, and, you know, illustrations and comics and all of it in this very underground, you know, trans community thing. And so I always had this idea that I was like part of that lineage in a little way, you know? And like, oh God, we've always been here and we've always been doing this. And nobody's been paying attention to us, and we're going to keep telling our stories.
Absolutely.
There, like I said, there was so little trans mask representation that I didn't have anything to connect with. Around the time that I was accepting myself as trans, we didn't have the term egg crack at the time, and I'm sad about that because it's such a good descriptor of what it feels like. It's different from coming out as queer, but when like your egg shatters and you can't put it back together and you're like, now I'm but around that time, Alison Bechtel was still doing Dykes to Watch Out For, and she included a trans man character as like a minor character in there. And I was reading it, and I was actually I wrote a review of that volume for Sojourner magazine, which no longer exists. But I had to be like, there are some inaccuracies in how the, and I knew she had a consultant, like she was talking to an actual trans man about it. But I was like, well, actually, technically, the time between your shot and when it peaks in your system is inaccurately represented within this comic. And I was not trying to, like, Allison and I are, we get along well. Like, I hesitate to say that we are friends because I don't, like, hang out with her, but we have a good relationship, and she wrote the foreword to my book. So in the review, I had to be like, okay, so there was this one small problem with how trans men were represented, and like it was totally fine. And you know, we had a conversation about it later. But that was kind of when I was like, there needs to be an own voices kind of a thing. And I was vaguely aware of like one other trans guy doing comics at that time. But it was really hard to find, and so I was just like, I'm not seeing the things that I want to see reflected for me, so I will just start making them and put it out there into the world. But it's kind of hard when there isn't already a community around that because it makes it harder to find.
Yeah.
So nowadays, like I'm sure there are several tables here of people selling their trans comics, and it's just become this explosion. Every zine fest I go to now is like half trans people, I swear, and it's great. I love seeing hordes and hordes of like loudly trans people out everywhere. But like when you're the one, like you're at that time, it's like, okay, can you Google search this and find me? You know, that's about. Type in trans man, what comes up, you know? Yeah. So yeah, like trying to make that happen kind of by brute force, I think, to some degree.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
I had, when I was in college, I had already assisted Tex Blaisdell in Prince Valiant and Little Orphan Annie and various other strips that he did backgrounds for. And but through that process, I learned that strips were terrible. The business of strips was terrible. You didn't own it yourself. You had a terrible schedule, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided strips were not for me. When I came out to San Francisco, I ran across Underground Comics. And here, the the cartoonists owned their own work. They could sell the comics and take all the money. It seemed fabulous. And even better, there were no standards. So anything that you thought up, that could be a comic. Once I got into Undergrounds, I discovered there was absolutely no money. You might own the comic, but you would get about 1/10 of the money for the comic. And at that time, there was no distribution. It would get piddled around to various comic stores individually, and when they sold out, they wouldn't get reordered, which we all thought was totally stupid, but that was the way it was. Throughout my life, I've been the first woman, the only woman, whatever woman, and so it didn't make any difference to me that there were no colleagues. And when women's comics started, those were my colleagues. We had wonderful meetings about every 2 weeks, and there were very little disagreements because we always had enhanced brownies. And so the feeling was mellow. Later on, there were serious discussions and disagreements, but that was later on. So I could do any kind of story I wanted to, and most importantly, each issue of women's comics had 50% newbies. So we always gave people who hadn't been published before an opportunity to get published. Eventually, that was internationally. So there were people from Norway, there were people from France, there were people from Alabama, all kinds of foreign entities. And that gave us a kind of community just from the comics. The feeling was very warm. And if we didn't get any money for it, So all of us had full-time or part-time jobs in order to eat, because the rush of creating something that you thought was valuable, that you thought was unique, was overwhelming. It kind of fueled all of us. And this has fueled me even to this day.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Lee. So we have about 10 minutes left. If anyone from the audience would like to submit any questions, we'd love to hear from you.
Lee, did you know, you must have known Diana Green?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to I was privileged to meet her a few years ago and have dinner with her and Rachel Pollack. And Diana Green was, I believe, the first published trans cartoonist in gay comics, and she just passed away recently, so pour one out for Diana.
Thank you for acknowledging that and calling that out. That's always really wonderful to hear.
I have a question. So besides your own publication, do you have any recommendations for people that really like queer comics, like any must-reads?
There are so many. But honestly, I still feel like the best work is being done in self-publishing and small presses. And like, I know that larger presses have started to put out more stuff, but I've often felt like they're a little cowardly about it. So, I don't know. All of my collection at this point is like indie stuff I got from people at conventions. I feel like I'm trying to think of like specific things off of my bookshelf. Who else is here? Blue Delaquanti is here. Oh, Human Star is a really good book series, and a lot of their stuff is amazing. Mel Gilman is does a lot of really excellent kind of queer focused like monster and horror stuff with lesbians, which is great. And I don't know, there's so many there's so many things.
No Straight Lines by our very own Justin Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it staggers me how much is out there and how many incredibly talented people are cranking out so much great stuff. I can mainly answer the people I know. You know, if you haven't read the work of John Macy, I think he's stunning. As well as I like, what's that book? Shirtlifter? It's like
Steve McIsaac.
Such a great design. I love the illustration in that. There's other people whose names I can't remember, but yeah, there's just a lot of great stuff out there.
We're Still Here from
Lovable Oaf.
Yeah, Lovable Oaf by Ed Luce is great. We Are Still Here is an anthology from Stack Deck Press that's all trans, and every story in there is great.
Honestly, Stack Deck is doing great work. They also published Alphabet, which features your work, Robin.
Anything by Justin Hall. Justin Green was from the old days. And the collections, if you can find them, of gay comics, because that's such a great array of talent. It's just impressive, even now.
I love that comic book about the gay Al Qaeda guy. Have you seen that? It's like I forget what it's called, but it's great drawing and wonderful satire.
I'm thinking of the Peaches comic, which is about the gay Nazi in North Africa, but I'm not remembering the Al Qaeda one.
Oh, you're talking about Desert Peach by
Yes.
Donna Barr.
Oh, yeah.
Which I know, like, it sounds like it should be terrible, but it's actually very funny, and it's actually like
Curious.
it doesn't apologize for Nazism. It's just like it kind of is like the dregs of the German army in North Africa and all of the misfits in there. It's very strange.
Okay, so it looks like we've got another question from the audience.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that two of the names that were mentioned, Mel Gilman and Blue Delaquanti, will be on the next panel. So check them out.
Hey, thank you. That was great hearing about all your work. And Robin, I didn't know there was a Vegas in Space comic.
Oh my God! Maybe one day there will be a Vegas in Space comic.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I started. Well, I started doing I wanted to do it like an old-fashioned like Treasury edition
Yeah. Okay.
movie adaptation. So I've
Yeah.
done. Yeah, I did several pages of it, and then decided I needed to understand more about the movie. So I've actually been creating an archive about Doris Fish and Vegas in
Awesome.
Space and the
Far
Sluts
out.
Go-Go. You can see it at dorisfish.com.
Yeah.
And we're working on the Blu-ray edition for the remastering that movie. So yeah, one of these days I will get back to doing that adaptation. We'll see what
Cool.
happens.
I did want to mention, I saw a movie last night at Artist Television Access, ATA. Mike Kuchar showed a movie from the 60s that he made, The Secret of Wendell Sampson. And he was there, he was in attendance. He did covers for Gay Heartthrobs and Meat Man and some other comics. And he's still out there. He still lives here in San Francisco. So I don't know if he's ever been to this conference, but maybe somebody should invite him. Thanks.
It looks like we got one here in the front.
How much is available at the library?
That's a very good question.
I can speak to that. So I'm a librarian and I'm the manager of the Hormel Center on the 3rd floor. And so we aren't the only place that collects LGBTQI titles, but we have a very vast array at the library in general. So we have the Little Magazines collection, which is actually part of our book arts and special collections. We have a lot of wonderful zines that actually are kind of from the heyday of 90s. So that's upstairs on the 6th floor. We've got lots of other titles. We have one of transposes. We've got transposes for checkout. So we have a lot of different titles. Just check out our catalog. Ask any of us here. We're happy to help you out. And a lot of titles are actually available if you don't mind reading on a device. Hoopla is an app that's free for anybody with a library card. There's a lot of really great comics on there.
Of the collection that you have, how much is available to check out?
I don't have a number for you, but it's a mix of some things that are very rare that are going to be in our Book Art Special Collections. Those are going to be library use only. But there are things, the Hoopla titles I mentioned are for checkout, and a number of other titles are available for checkout. So I don't have an exact number for you, but we definitely actively collect queer comics.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I just want to add that there is a fantastic graphic novel selection here. We were here on Friday, and we lost many hours going through it all.
That's about time. Do we have any last quick questions? No?
You're all so knowledgeable or extremely shy.
Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you being out and talking about your work. Thank you all.